Good morning, everyone. Welcome to RSA 2023. Always nerve-wracking to be in the early morning on Monday, although I guess not as bad as those who had like the 8:30 talks. So glad to see you're all here, that you made it safely. She said, I'm Andy Ellis. I'm the advisory CISO for Orca Security. I'm also the author of 1% Leadership, which launched last week, for those of you looking for something to read in the bookstore. Joined here today by Oren.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm Oren. I'm the Chief of Staff at Orca Security.
Yep.
And before that, I was a security researcher and also a technical product leader of this product.
Yep. So I think first we have to give you the obligatory disclaimer that whatever we say here is not the opinion of RSA. It might not even be our opinions, but who knows? So, and this is being audio recorded, at least our microphones are. So if you say something really loud, it will be picked up and we will shame you for it. And if you ask a question, that will certainly be something that we're going to record. So we wanted to start, if we're going to talk about fairy tales, we're going to begin with a reading. For those of you who recognize the Book of Red, we'll start. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who was loved by all who knew her, but especially by her grandmother. Grandmother had given the child a red velvet hood, and the little girl loved it so much that she would never wear anything else. And so she got the nickname Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother said to her, "Little Red Riding Hood, take this cake and bottle of cordial to grandmother. She is not feeling well, and they will do her good. But promise me you won't stray from the path. Walk straight to grandmother's and be sure to say good morning when you get there." Little Red Riding Hood promised and set out with her basket. Grandmother lived in the woods, a half-hour's walk from the village. As Little Red Riding Hood walked along, she saw a wolf in front of her on the path. She had never met a wolf before, so she was not a bit afraid. "Good morning, Red Riding Hood," he said. "Good morning, Wolf," she answered, remembering to be polite. "Where might you be going on this fine day?" the wolf asked. "To grandmother's house," Red Riding Hood told him. "She has not been feeling well." "And what do you have in your basket?" asked the wolf. "Some cake and some cordial," said Red Riding Hood, "to make her feel better." "Where does your grandmother live?" the wolf wanted to know. "A bit farther into the woods," Red Riding Hood told him. "Straight down this path." Thought the wolf. "This little girl will make a tasty treat indeed, much more tender than the old woman. I will have the old woman for dinner and this little morsel for dessert." The wolf walked a little way with Red Riding Hood. Then he said, "Look at all the lovely flowers. I am sure your grandmother would love to have some." Red Riding Hood looked at all the bright flowers dancing in the woods. "What a perfect gift for grandmother," she thought. "It is still early. I have time to pick a nice bouquet." So Little Red Riding Hood left the path to pick the flowers. But each time she picked one, she saw another one a little farther on, and so she wandered deeper and deeper into the woods. Meanwhile, the wolf went straight to grandmother's cottage and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" called grandmother. It is Red Riding Hood," said the wolf in the sweetest voice he could manage. "Lift the latch and come in, my dear," said grandmother. "I am too weak to get out of bed." The wolf lifted the latch, sprang through the door, and swallowed the poor old woman whole. Then he put on her gown and nightcap, climbed into her bed, and drew the curtains. When Red Riding Hood had picked all the flowers she could carry, she hurried on to grandmother's house. She was surprised to see the door standing open. "Good morning, grandmother," she called from the doorway, but no one answered. So she walked over to the bed and opened the curtains. There lay her grandmother. But she had pulled her nightcap around her face, and she looked very odd. "Oh, grandmother," said Red Riding Hood, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf. "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with," said the wolf. "Oh, grandmother, what big teeth you have," said Red Riding Hood. "The better to eat you with, my dear," cried the wolf, and he swallowed Red Riding Hood right up. Then he crawled back under the covers for a nap. There's a little more to the story, because mostly we don't want kids to be afraid they're going to be eaten by wolves and be dead forever. But I wanted to stop there, because this is a fairy tale, but it's a story about risk and hazards and threats. Oren, what did you think?
So let's try to build an attack forest from this story. So, yeah. So, of course, we will start with the Little Red Riding Hood. We know that her grandmother is sick. Therefore, her mother sends her with a basket to go to visit her. So she walks in the woods. We know that she goes by herself. And then she meets the wolf. There is a weird conversation between both of them about what she's doing and what he's doing. And then the wolf gets the address of the grandmother. The Little Red Riding Hood is going to pick some flowers. Meanwhile, the wolf is going to grandmother's house and eats grandmother. Later on in the story, the Little Red is going to visit her grandmother. Basically, it's not her grandmother anymore. And then she is eaten by the wolf. So this is just quite, I mean, it's not all the details, it's just part of them, and you can see it's quite complex.
Yeah, it's a lot of details. It actually reminds me of an exercise we often did when I was in grade school, where you had to take a story and draw all the pieces of it. Yep. And in a sense, it's like the original watering hole attack. Like, Wolf knows where Red's going to be and goes and waits there for her. But I think this is still a little complex if we wanted to talk about this. And I think we've talked a lot about attack paths, like how an adversary gets from entry to whatever their goal is. So could you do this as an attack path?
Yeah, sure. So let's try to drop all the irrelevant details, and we will have something like that. And this is an attack path. And when we're talking about an attack path, so we have the first part of the social engineering, where the wolf gets the target information. Then we have the first identity takeover, where wolf takes the identity of Red. And then the second identity takeover, where the wolf takes the identity of grandmother, and the end, where the wolf eats Red. Of course, it's not the real end of the story, but for now, this is the end of the story. So what do you think, Antti? I think it's much more simpler and easy to understand.
So it definitely is. I think this shows the attack path, and I think a lot of folks like it because I saw some phones come up for people taking pictures. By the way, we've already published these slides, so if you want a copy of them, the easiest way is go find me on Twitter at CSOAndy. I literally just posted half an hour ago the link to a blog post about this, and the first link inside that is the slides. But I really like this. But the problem this has now, because we wanted to talk about how you talk to the board, or really any executive. So when we say board in here, we include your C-level executives, whether it's the CISO if you're not the CISO, or if you are the CISO, everybody else around you. And I think this doesn't talk about what we're going to do. Yeah. This just talks about what happened. Mm-hmm. So let me do another twist on this and say, here's how I would take this story and use it to drive a change within our company. So I'm going to have a slide that looks like this, the Red Riding Hood Awareness Initiative. Right? Because I do care a little bit about Red in this case, although maybe I don't want to single her out. And I'm going to talk about the unacceptable loss. This is the business impact that we're going to deal with. And so in this case, Little Red gets eaten. That seems like a pretty significant unacceptable loss, whether you're mom or Little Red. Either way, you're probably a little sad about this. And then we talk about hazards. And what hazards are is states within your organization or your environment that create risk for you. And in this case, one of our hazards is that we use a lot of knowledge-based authentication that is very vulnerable to social engineering. Like, how does grandmother know who's at the door? They say their name. Hi, I'm Little Red. How does Little Red know who grandmother is? Because the wolf says, hi, I'm grandmother. And also, there seems to be a distinct lack of adversary awareness. There's wolves in these woods, and nobody apparently told Little Red about wolves. So these are the hazards we need to deal with, and to deal with that, we're going to drive an initiative. The initiative here is really focused on awareness training. We're going to teach Red to question strangers a little bit more. Trust her instincts when she thinks someone's lying to her. Very clearly, she had good instincts. She's like, you don't look like grandmother. Your ears aren't the right shape. Your mouth, your eyes aren't the right shape. And boy, are those big teeth. Maybe if Little Red had wandered away, she might have not been eaten in the first place. And also, we are going to put a lock on grandmother's door. Seems like that might be a helpful thing to add here. So this is the way I would take that fairy tale and now go tell a story within the business about what I'm going to do to solve it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. But Andy, we are 10 minutes in this talk, and we're talking about Red Riding Hood. I think I suppose to think that we are talking about cloud, you know? So
Yep.
what about the cloud forest?
Yeah, so I think we'll have the same thing. So I think the first thing we need to do, in the same way you drew a forest, is I think we should draw a cloud. So what does the cloud look like?
So let's look at a typical cloud environment, and believe me, Andy, it's that complicated. So we have databases, VMs, buckets, IAM users, IAM roles, you have VPC, Kubernetes clusters. We have so many different assets, and this can be one cloud account. We have, of course, more than one cloud account, and it can be in also more than one cloud provider. So you know that more than 40% of the organizations have more than one cloud provider, which means they have AWS and GCP or Azure or Alibaba. So it's quite complicated.
Yep. So one of the things I noticed in looking at this is if 5 years ago we'd have been up here and just had a typical network environment, we would have very heavily focused on the network layer and how things were connected. And here you've just sort of put everything up interconnected. Yeah. Is that just because we didn't want to deal with the network, or because there's a big transformation we have to think about here?
No, so of course, not all the assets are connected one to each other, but it's just for simplicity, and even sometimes people doing some mistakes that make a lot of assets being connected to many different assets in the cloud.
Okay, so this is a big environment. If we're going to talk about what we want to fix, I think we need to focus on the risky elements of this. So if I were to ask you to color code these for green, yellow, red, for how much risk each one presented, what would it look like?
So I'm sorry to tell you, but it will look like this. We have so many different alerts from so many different scanners and so many different products, so it's really hard to understand and to know what you should fix.
Right, so we're basically saying every machine has some problems with it, and the question really is going to be, how do those come together?
Yeah.
So I think for this talk, if we tried to walk through something this complex, which I suspect is actually fairly simple compared to cloud environments people have, that'd be a little much. So why don't we simplify it a little more?
Yeah, so we will start from this cloud environment. You can see on the left side, we have the internet, and then we have all the different assets on our cloud account. And for this example, we will focus on one cloud provider, so we will take AWS in this example, but again, it can be more than one cloud provider.
Okay, and the assets that are closer to the internet are presumably internet-facing. They could be reached from anybody, and the ones on the inside are less so?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, so walk me through an attack path. How does an adversary attack us in this environment?
Yeah, so let's start with this one. On the left side, we have the internet. Then we have an Ubuntu server, which is the one with the orange circle. And then we can see that it's connected to a database, the asset on the right side. And if we will go and see what's going on inside this attack path, we will be able to notice that we have this Ubuntu server, the one with the orange circle, and we know that is public-facing, internet-facing. From one of our scanner accounts or scanning products, we have an alert, an issue of remote code execution. So we know that anyone from the internet can access this Ubuntu server and run this vulnerability. In this case, it's Apache Commons Text. It was also known as Text for Shell. You know, Andy, it was from the 4Shell season.
Right, once something becomes famous like Log4Shell, like every vulnerability for a year is something for Shell?
Yeah, exactly. And we also have another detection of password in shell history. Maybe one of the developers ran this command, and we know the user and the password. And Andy, I think that even you can know the real password behind this.
I'm going to guess it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just based on looking at that one.
Yeah, exactly. And we know that with those credentials, a potential attacker, an adversary, can achieve this customer's database. And basically, the PII that we have, and in this case, it's email addresses, which are all on this customer's database, are exposed to the internet. So if I will summarize it into one sentence, the email addresses, the sensitive data, the PII, is exposed to the internet via those 2 or 3 basic steps for a potential attacker.
Okay, so I like that. That's really simple and clear. Since I started in a technical side of the role before I became a CISO, I actually get almost everything that's on there. I even think I know what RDS is. But this is not how I'm going to go talk about it when I go talk to my peer executives. So let's talk about the initiative I'm going to go drive now. So this is my initiative. Software vulnerability management. That's a serious problem. I'm going to draw a stat for you out of the state of public cloud security, which is that 78% of all attack paths start with a known exploitable vulnerability. Like that's an existing hazard. Hopefully in my environment, I'm going to go pull up and see what my exact number is, but I can just use this to default. Start with the unacceptable loss. Customer data breach, just stopping right there. Like if somebody asks what's the data, I'm like, okay, it's the email addresses for whichever specific, is this my marketing list? Is this my existing accounts? Hopefully it's not my billing accounts, because that would give a competitor a list of like who to go offer discounts to say, hey, you get, the person you do business with gets breached, and we can give you a discount and keep you safe. I'm going to talk about that hazard, 78%. And now what's my initiative? My initiative is going to be focused on patch management. In this case, how do we reduce the open windows? I don't know when Text for Shell was last year. Those numbers are now too big in CVEs. I think there's a 5-digit number. I remember the argument over 5-digit numbers, so I can't tell if that was November or April and we're already a year old. So this is my initiative. This is what I want to drive in the company is we need to stop having machines that are open to the internet that have exploitable vulnerabilities in, that are a year, which is certainly outside any reasonable SLA. Certainly for remote code execution, which should be 30 days or under in any enterprise.
Yeah, I've noticed that you drop all the technical phrases that I've used.
Yep.
The remote code execution, Apache, the password, and you are not mentioning them at all.
Yeah. So the key there is, so you've come out of an architecture background, which I did as well. And architects tend to have a worldview that is actually fairly consistent. I'm going to say static, but we grow it. But when I start talking about an environment, and I say, oh, Apache Commons, and you're like, yep, I know exactly where all my Apache servers are. Right, those are the ones on Ubuntu. We haven't yet moved to whatever, because you know what that whole environment looks like, and you're going to put it into that frame of reference. Because mostly architects have a domain and a scope that they're expected to be experts in. So I can add in buzzwords, and you know which ones are new and which ones are references. Executives know nothing. Sorry if there are executives in the room, but at any given time, you walk into a conversation with an executive, and you have to assume they know absolutely nothing about whatever you're talking about. And they're going to take whatever keywords you give them and try to build a mental model at that point based on the keywords. So any keywords that are not important, like Apache Commons text, right? Because they hear that and they're gonna be like, what do I know about Apache? Not, what do I know about our Apache servers? No, what do I know about Apache? And they're like, Commons text. I don't know what that is, but I know Commons. Oh, wait, that's Creative Commons. Wait, are we using open source? Like you might be in this rat hole conversation that has nothing to do with what you care about. Mm-hmm. Plus, they're not actually interested in solving a problem. They want to solve a whole scope of problems. And so if I came in and said, oh, we need to patch our software all across the company because we had an Apache Commons server that was compromised, they're going to say, well, why don't you just fix the Apache Commons server and not disrupt the whole business? So it's very important to make sure that you use the smallest argument possible to spur action. And that's it.
Okay. It was fun. Let's try another one.
Okay, let's do another one.
Okay, so here we have a different attack path. In this case, we have an Nginx server, the one with the green circle. We know that it's internet facing, and we can see that it's attached to probably a user or a role who has some AWS credentials or permissions. And if we will see what are the details, so again, we have the web Nginx, which is exposed to the internet. We can see a different remote code execution alert or detection from our system. And we can see that in this case, it's Nginx from 2021. And we also have another alert of sensitive AWS keys that are related to John. You know John?
I don't know John yet, but apparently I'm about to.
Yeah, so it's John from DevOps. And John has administrator access. So if I will summarize it into one sentence, a potential attacker, an adversary, can have administrator access with only 2 or 3 steps. That's amazing.
And I noticed this is a vulnerability from 2021. So this is at least 18 months old at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's pivot this and see how do we go solve this. So I've already talked about vulnerability management, so I've got another initiative for that. So let's focus on the cloud identity entitlements management. And one of the things that we see in a lot of cloud environments is how easy it is for people to just use very broad accounts to give access to everything, because it's hard to keep track of what needs access to what. And sometimes those broad accounts are administrators, which probably a little too broad for almost anything you want to do for within the cloud. So our unacceptable loss here, because we get AWS admin access, is loss of control of our entire cloud estate. Now, that has secondary losses that are probably customer data stolen. We're out of business for a little while if we rely on the cloud, but we're going to focus on sort of this hazard that people can wrap their head around. We've got two issues here. One is the highly privileged accounts in widespread use. The second one is a key that's stored insecurely on disk, especially a key that's associated with a human. But whether it's associated with a human or a machine role, I think we don't want to have it just sitting there on disk where anybody who gets access to the machine can use it. So my initiative here, first of all, is an identity management initiative. So we're going to restrict access. One of the things I think we found doing some analysis across some customer bases is there's like a handful of actions you can take, somewhere around 5 to 8, that are going to reduce the total access users are going to have by about 60 to 80%. And that's just like, let's just get those done and then figure out if we want to go all the way to tight least privilege. And of course, clean up key storage. Like we want to make sure that machine identities are tied to machines in a way that keeps them relatively secure.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to mention John. Actually, I want to really call that one out. It's really tempting when you have an issue to take the human who's responsible and throw them under the bus, right? And then it's like, whew, not my problem we didn't have key management. That was John's problem for doing this, right? And probably John was a little sloppy here, and I'm going to go have words with John about the practices of the DevOps team. But when I go in front of management, I like drawing from one of my favorite safety professors, Nancy Levison, and she says, human error is a symptom of a system in need of redesign. And so if I want to focus on redesign, I can't talk about the human error in front of other executives, because they're always going to aim on the smallest action to solve the problem, which would be fire John. It's not going to solve our problem. Probably going to make things a lot worse, because I just lost a DevOps engineer.
Okay, let's try one more, and it will be a little bit different. So here we have a compromised Bastion, and you can see Bastion server, which with the red circle, and we can see that again it's internet-facing and is connected to another VM probably, and we have an alert on this Bastion server of malware, and you can see that it's a Trojan Linux agent EIS. So it's not a potential attacker, and it's not an adversary. It's really something that already happened. So on this Bastion, we have a malware. And again, it's internet-facing, so probably, I don't know how, but somehow the malware is on this machine. And we also found that we have an insecure SSH key that give, and it's probably not a potential attacker, but give maybe the real attacker that is on our systems right now, the ability to access this machine learning test, ML test machine. And we know that we have some sensitive training data sets over there. So we know we have some PII. So, and in this case, it's not a potential attacker, and it's not something that might be happen. It's maybe already here.
Yeah, and this one was very weird when you brought it up and suggested it and pulled this out of an actual environment, because this combines two of the worst incidents I ever had to deal with as a CSO. One was the Fluffy Bunny incident back in, God, I want to say like 2001. Which was the malware and SSH key. So this is not going to be an initiative. This is an incident, and so we're going to operate at incident tempo in conversations. Really important when you're dealing with security problems that you recognize that you have different ways that you solve problems. Anything that is high cost, either time or money, or people's time, and high value, like those are initiatives. Like those require executive buy-in, we have to line everybody up. If it is low cost, like I can fix this right now, and high value, that's an incident, right? Somebody has broken into a system. It's going to take us like a couple of hours to go deal with the immediate problem. Of course, you deal with that at incident tempo. If it's low value, either it's just a normal change request. Don't tell executives, just get it fixed. Or if it's low value and really high cost, you're probably never going to fix it. Just call it a hazard and move on. So just putting that word in context. So first of all, we have an unacceptable loss. Again, we're back to loss of sensitive data. two different hazards. One is the initiative, that we have malware in our system right now that has access to assets in the cloud. I'm going to have to solve that. The second is going to be the follow-on initiative. Never let a crisis go to waste. If there's a problem that you need to fix that's currently in an incident, make sure you don't just put a Band-Aid on the problem and move on. See if you can fix the underlying hazard. In this case, apparently we had malware that remained undetected in our environment. Like, I'm not sure how long that machine has been firing alert, and only just now did Oren get around to telling me, so it's all Oren's fault. But I got to fix that. So initiative tempo, or incident tempo, I'm going to remove existing malware. First of all, by redeploying systems. This is the cloud. This is the time when the advice we've always said you should do, which is wipe it, pave it, and start over when it's compromised. Like, we have systems that just let us do this, so make sure we do that. But then more importantly, we need some operational processes to help us respond to malware. I think I'll probably delegate that to my chief of staff and say, hey, give us a process for that.
Yeah. OK, let me try one by myself.
OK, let's go for it.
So we have, again, the same compromised bastion, internet-facing, as always in this talk. And we can see that it's connected to an AWS user or role. And we have some AWS permissions. And at the end, we can see that the last asset is a bucket. And if we will go to see the exact details of this attack path, we will be able to see, again, the same Bastion server, the same malware. And we already have, and because we have talked about it a few slides ago, we have sensitive AWS keys. And in this case, they are related to Peter. So, Andy.
Maybe it's not just John's fault. Maybe we need some gender diversity in that team, because it seems to be all the guys who are screwing up.
Yeah. So we have Peter with Amazon S3 full access, which is quite a broad permission. And with those permissions, he can access the bucket of customers' private data, which holds some social security numbers. So again, it's compromised already. So the potential attacker who already are in our systems can access those social security number. I hope that he won't notice those AWS keys and he won't recon all of our buckets. But to be honest, probably he already did it.
Yep.
So this is the attack path. And if I will
go for it.
Take your role and we'll try to make an initiative from this one. So the initiative will be PII identification, or maybe sensitive data identification. The unacceptable loss will be the customer data, of course, the social security number. The hazard that we have here is that PII is stored in many different data stores. And in this case, it was stored on AWS S3 bucket. And I will create two initiatives. The first one is that we should identify the location of all of our sensitive data on all of our machines and databases and buckets and so on. And the second initiative will be to remove or restrict the broad permission that Peter has, the Amazon S3 full access, in order to support the principle of least privilege that we have. So it was fine.
Yeah, so I like this. The one thing I'm going to note is you have one hazard and two. OK, you have two hazards now and two initiatives. So yeah, really important that when you're talking to an executive that they can see the line you're tying. That when you say, here's the work we have to do, they've got to be able to match it to a hazard. Mm-hmm. And so, and generally they're going to look for one-to-one, even though we all know it's not really one-to-one. So sometimes you have to be creative in how you split a hazard apart. But if you're going to say, here's two things we have to do, they're going to see that those are two controls that match to two hazards.
OK.
Let's do one more.
Yeah. So the last one for today is an attack path. And we can see now a Tomcat server, the one with the yellow circle, which is exposed to the internet. And we can see that it's connected to a Jenkins machine. Andy, you know what is Jenkins?
Sounds like a butler to me.
So yeah, it's also a logo of a butler, but at the end is an automation server used mainly for CI/CD processes and mainly for developers. And the details of this attack path is different. So we don't have, it's not compromised. So you can be a little bit more relaxed.
Well, we don't know that it's compromised.
Yeah. So we have a Tomcat server, a cluster Tomcat. In this case, it's container. We know that it's internet-facing, public-facing, so anyone can access those machines. And I didn't mention it before, but at the end, yeah, there are a lot of different assets. It's not internet and then the machine, of course. but we want to simplify the story. So we are drawing, and this diagram helps us when we're saying, like, this is the internet and this is the machine. And we have an alert of unsupported host OS on this Tomcat server. And we know that this machine, the distribution, is Debian 9.1, which the end of support was in last June. So it's not so good, Andy.
What version of Debian are we on now?
11. I think the stable is 11.
Okay.
Yeah. And we also have another alert, another detection of insecure SSH key that can give a potential attacker, an adversary, the ability to access this Jenkins machine, who holds some PII, and in this case, it's a Git repository. As I said before, Jenkins holds probably, most of the time, holds some Git repos.
I'm kind of curious what PII is in our Git repository. That's probably a separate problem to talk about.
Yeah. And the initiative will be system support initiative. So the unacceptable loss, in this case, is loss of IP, our code, our Git repository. The hazards that we will have, so we will have 2 hazards, and as you teach me, we will have 2 initiatives. So the first one will be that assets without owners become neglected over time.
Yep.
No one knows who is the owner of this asset, and who is responsible to fix and to patch this asset.
I don't think anybody here has ever had that problem of finding an asset and not knowing who is responsible for it, though.
Yeah. And the second hazard will be that neglected assets becoming unsupported by the vendors and contains a lot of vulnerabilities and a lot of ways to enter those machines and to break them. So the initiative, as we said, we will have 2 initiatives. The one will be that all of our systems supposed to have an DevOps owners, and it can be also dev owners, but maybe DevOps owners are a little bit better, to support and to maintain those systems, which means they need to patch them and they need to make sure that they are up to date. And the second initiative, as you know, the real world is not that good, so we need also to track the system to have a system to track all of our system and to make sure that we don't have any system without an owner, and to make sure that we are up to date with all of our assets.
Yep. Yeah, I like this. I think the comment I'd put on the DevOps owners is to think that as a role instead of a organizational hierarchy.
Yeah.
Is that every system has to have a DevOps owner, assuming we're a DevOps shop. And if there is nobody in DevOps who owns it, that doesn't mean the dev can't be the DevOps owner, but somebody has to fill that role. And oftentimes I've seen people who are like, well, we're just in testing, so we haven't rolled it out to DevOps yet, right? We're still in that early environment. And I'm like, well, great, then you're the DevOps team too. And that can be a very entertaining conversation to have with engineers.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what we did here. And we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. So if you have any, start thinking about them now. So we summarized all of what we had here of how to go from these attack paths to initiatives. And the key thing we really want people to walk away from is attack paths become unimportant once you're talking to your executive team. That the attack path is for you. It's to help you understand what your hazards are. But as you notice, we translate you everything. An unpatched machine just becomes software vulnerability management. Now, presumably, if you only have one unpatched machine in your environment, you are not creating an initiative just to go solve that. Just deal with one machine. If you're that lucky, congratulations. Don't go looking for a different job because you seem to be in a great place. All the way over to compromised Bastion and PII, where we're going to go figure out where our PII is and what it is. And I think that's a challenge that people haven't really started to come to terms with, is PII is no longer one thing. Like every country has its own rules governing their citizens' PII. So you can't just identify by saying, oh, I see I have email addresses. You might care about which ones are French users and which ones are German users, and those are going to be different from your California users. So each of these initiatives is a very broad and an expensive task. Like we're not trying to minimize how much work those are here.
Yeah. So let's look at our key takeaways from this talk. So first, and the most important thing that we suppose you to do is to identify a risk. And when we're saying identify a risk, what we mean is to map out all of your critical attack paths. Try to sort them by the severity, and the severity can be a combination of 2 different scores. It might be the impact score about the unacceptable loss, because maybe social security numbers, it's more relevant and more important for you than, I don't know, email addresses or something like that. And the second might be the complex of a potential attacker to achieve those crown jewels, this PII, this unacceptable loss. So at the end, you should know what are all of your critical attack paths and to sort them by some severity and to score them by low, medium, and high maybe. The second thing that you should do is to understand your hazards. And here we separate it into two different tasks. The first one is to evaluate some common elements. So as Andy said before, it doesn't matter if we have one attack path with, I don't know, Nginx vulnerability and one with Apache vulnerability. The most important thing for you is to say, okay, I want to have an initiative for all of our for all of our vulnerabilities. It doesn't matter if it's Apache or Nginx. The second one, of course, you cannot come just with the problems. You should come with some solutions. So you need to define some appropriate way to mitigate the risk. So as we said, try in the initiative and try to propose some call to action, or try to propose a solution for the problems that you have. And then try to elevate the conversation. And you can use those diagrams, those attack paths, in order to talk and to tell a simplified stories to your executive and to your board. It doesn't matter what are the technical level. They can be a security researcher with 20 years of experience, and it can be some executive from the financial area or the CEO or something like that. And they will feel much, much better when they will understand what are the risks, what happened, and try to reduce and tell them the most simplified stories that you can, and use them to create some effective projects that they will buy in, and they will give you, okay, here's the money, go and fix it.
Or sometimes even just, here's the air cover. I will say this is important. You still have to go drive it with your existing budget.
Yeah, of course, but it's very important for them to understand what are you doing and what you suppose and what you are trying to achieve with those initiatives.
Yeah, so I really like that. It's a great summary. I think folks can take that away. If you have a question, there's going to be 2 microphones here. If you don't have a question, that's okay. Jump to the next slide. And just, so how to find us if you don't want to ask a question now, or you're looking maybe for me to sign your copy of my book. I'll be doing a book signing right after this at the bookstore. Tonight, I'll be at the welcome reception in booth, what are we, South 527?
Yeah, 527.
There's a giant version of this little guy, like 15 feet tall, in the booth, so it should be easy to spot, and I'll be we'll be giving away some books and signing there. Then we've got a party tomorrow night for Orca, and I've got one for Wild Ventures on Wednesday, where I'll be signing, so you can find us at any of those places, and there I am on social media. Okay, and I think we've got one person queued up for a question. Thank you.
Hi, Phil Beyer. Oren, Andy, thanks so much. This is fantastic, very clear, very helpful. It struck me that as you started to describe the kind of template of this talking through at the executive level, loss to hazard to initiative, that was a very kind of accessible way that not just for the audience, but also for you to kind of delegate down to the team and almost mandate this common lexicon when communicated even up to and preparing for those conversations. I'm curious if you might say just an itsy bit more about how you've put that, either of you have put that into practice in terms of you know, delegating that work down to the team.
Yep, so that's actually drawn from the systems theoretic process analysis, which Nancy Levison is the one who drew it in, which is one of the reasons I called out to her. Her book, Engineering a Safer World, is one of the best textbooks I've ever read on this. It is a textbook, so don't buy it thinking it's a light, fluffy management book like mine. This is actually some really serious, deep work. And what's really useful, actually, first of all, I didn't delegate this into my team delegated it up to me. Like, this was their lexicon that they were driving. I provide the air cover, and now I'm going to evangelize it outwards. I think a lot of people make that mistake of saying, you, the CISO, have to be the smart one who makes the decisions. If you've got 20 people who've decided on a shared cultural language, it's easier for you to adopt theirs than for you to create one and force it downwards. So in this case, I was lucky. I had some commonality there. So my job became always using this language when I spoke outside of our organization. So that this term unacceptable loss was not one which was in common use in our engineering organizations, But over the time, as I would continuously talk about, like, what is the unacceptable loss here? Or here is the unacceptable loss. It created a way that when my people came and talked to their people, they were using the same language I was using. And that's actually one of the most important things, is that when you as an executive are talking to your peer executives, the language terms you use should have commonality with what your technical staff are doing. So even though my technical teams would be willing to talk about Apache and Nginx and things of that nature, they're still going to say unacceptable losses and hazards. And often where we talk initiative here, but initiative is the program, we would be talking about a control objective and what are the controls we wanted to put in place, because we really do think about control systems as how you're going to mitigate this. But control systems sound a little too techy for executives, so we tend to use initiatives as what puts in place those control systems. And I found it to be highly effective when I was at Akamai as the CISO there.
That's a super helpful clarification. I would not have expected, I'm glad you explained that, because I would not have expected you to say that's how it was derived or came
Yeah,
from.
I developed a reputation that nobody in my team would argue with me, that whatever language I used is what they would then use. And what most people never realized is it wasn't that that they weren't arguing with me, it's that I wasn't arguing with them.
Right, right. Very good, very good. One final question. Oh, okay, I'll get out of the way. Regarding not citing a team member by name.
Yep.
Great, makes perfect sense to me. Have also found that to be very helpful in my own experience for my team members as well as myself. I wonder if that changes at all, if it's for other business units or other folks throughout the company. I suspect I know the answer, but I figured maybe I'd ask you to clarify whether you ever would come in a situation where you'd cite failure of another group or folks outside of your team.
So sometimes you're going to have to, like, you can't avoid this is a DevOps problem, but I try really hard to say, what was true in their world that made this a reasonable choice to make? Because oftentimes we look at this practice and we say, well, why is it that John and Peter keep using their admin keys for everything? And we say, oh, we don't blame John and Peter, so let's just blame the group. Instead of saying, why is it that we haven't built a better system and the DevOps group is highlighting the problem for us? And so you can use some of that same language, because as soon as you start saying, well, this group was at fault, like you're just creating the same problem just at an executive level instead of at an individual level. Plus, it's always useful to generate political capital. If you know that your group was at fault, and I stood in front of the executive team, and at no point did I throw shade at your group, you know that you owe me. And I never even have to tell you you owe me. The next time I come and ask for something, you're like, Andy's got my back.
Yeah, don't fix the blame, fix the problem, right?
Yes.
Oren, thank you. Andy, this was great. Quick follow-up. I agree that wholeheartedly about the issue of common language, and what I've found with management is, it's this group speaks ones and zeros, they speak dollar and cents, so let's meet in the middle and speak their language, right? Because management has no responsibility or interest in all the stuff that they don't care about.
Yep.
So this may be something that's too long to answer here, but a CFO is going to look at a problem and say, it's axiomatic, I don't spend $1 million to solve a $50 problem. So the first thing they're going to say is, so there's a risk. What's going to cost if it goes wrong? What's going to cost to fix it? Because they can't make that decision, and often the security team doesn't have the financial acumen or data to give them an answer. So when you go, hey, we got a thing and we got to fix it, and I need air cover, or I need budget, or I need to divert that release for a week because we got to deal with the thing that happened or the risk that it might happen, how do you quantify that? Because they're only going to understand if you speak their language, because they're not going to meet you in the middle. How do you deal with that quantify the problem question?
So that would be an entirely different talk, but I'll give you my very brief
Sorry.
version of it, which is I think you shouldn't bother trying to quantify risk, and I think it's a fool's errand. And I know there's a whole bunch of talks at RSA that say I'm completely wrong on this one. You can go learn how to do FAIR, and I think it's foolish. If you'd like to know how to talk a CFO's language, ask to talk to them about their risks. Walk into a CFO and say, hey, we're a global company. I assume Forex is a risk for us. How do you talk about Forex with the board? Foreign exchange, sorry, for those of you who know what Forex is. They don't walk in and say, well, our dollar cost of Forex risk is $762.57 million. They don't have a number for it. What they do is they talk about how big it might be. So there's a little bit of that quantification. How big might this be? But if I walk in and say, look, there's a potential loss of IP, et cetera, they're going to say, okay, well, what does that mean? Because that may be for them not a business term yet. So if I say, well, it could be that now any vulnerabilities latent in our system that we haven't found, everybody knows about because our source code is out there. And then I can point at some breaches, and they'd be like, oh, let's see what that risk is. Or if I say, well, I might have a data breach because I've got like 50 people's email addresses about to be published. They're like, 50 people's email addresses, show me a breach where that was actually significant for a company. That's a $50 problem. It's embarrassing, but we shouldn't be here. But if it's, oh, we might be sanctioned by the EU and several member states because it's several million, and the result would be a consent order with the FTC, right? So you can still put it in business terms and qualify the risk for them.
Yeah,
But
they
I
can do
think
the math for
chasing
themselves.
down a dollar
Yeah.
is a fool's errand, because the reality is you will get to a number and they can always come in and find one place you made a mistake. And that one mistake you made is the smallest argument necessary for them to spur the action of ignoring you.
Thank you. That was gold.
Thank you. Some of these arguments show up right here. I'm just very seriously like, that's.
Hey, thank you for fostering that no blame culture, which is really important. We talked a lot about the attack path from adversaries outside the organization. How would you enumerate risk conversation with the board when it comes to insider threat scenarios?
So the way that I like to think about insider threats, Oren's my biggest insider threat, is, anybody's ever read the Microsoft design guidelines for inclusive design? It's usually not something security folks have read, but it's fantastic. It's about how to build software for various forms of inclusion. Maybe somebody's blind or deaf, et cetera. And one of the things they talk about is the difference between a permanent disability, a temporary disability, and a situational disability. So since they say, like, if you were trying to design for people with only one arm, there's like 110,000 humans on the planet with only one arm, and you would probably never actually design your software to be used by a one-armed human because it's such a tiny piece of your market. But temporarily one-armed humans, there's like at any point, there's millions of people who have broken an arm, have carpal tunnel, something where they only have access to one arm for like 6 weeks. But situationally, like everybody walking out of a shopping plaza with a bag in their arm or holding a baby or anything is one-armed. And so you design for one-armed in that situation. I think about insiders the same way. If you over-focus on designing for malicious employees who work for you, first of all, you create an awful paranoid organization. But you also will do things that are harmful to your company because you're trying to get in the way of people doing the business. If instead you say, like, first of all, employees are never the problem. It's the employee system is the problem. Right? What I'm really designing for is a malicious employee system, which could be a permanent, I've got somebody who's a traitor to my organization who wants to put me out of business. Very, very rare. It could be that machine has been compromised. And so the controls that I put in place are not targeting the human, they're targeting their identity on the network. And how do I make the security work around that identity versus working around the human? And finally, there are situationally malicious employees. Like, it is entirely possible that you run into a security control that gets in the way, and so you subvert it. Has anybody ever done that they're willing to admit? Because I am. But I will tell you, every non-security professional will put their hands up. And they'll say, there's a security rule, it's stupid, and I subvert it. If you can get them drunk enough to admit it.
And let me add just one more thing. You can use the same method, and it won't the first asset, and it can be VM or user or role, it doesn't matter. It can be not internet facing, and it can be an internal asset. And then you can try to quantify and to understand the unacceptable loss from this internal spot.
Yep.
So it's not supposed to be, it can, yeah, thank you. It can be like an internal asset and not an internet-facing one. So it's the same mechanism, but for an internal cases.
And with that, we've got 30 seconds. So this was Oren's first talk, for those of you who didn't figure that, who probably hopefully didn't figure that out. So first of all, as a memento for you,
Thank you very much.
the Fairy Tales book. And since Oren was literally just promoted, we announced it this week to being in management. So welcome to management. I have for you the best management book ever written.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.